Pain is everything. It is everywhere, and it is everyone. And I'm not saying this because I want to deter you from listening, but it's an important conversation because pain is the root of quote-unquote addiction and why everyone is a quote-unquote addict. But we do not have to be addicts forever. But all of us, at one time or another, we dip our toes in the alluring waters of escape that addiction represents to us as an illusion because we don't want to face reality. But do not fear, because today we're going to discuss the addiction narrative and what you can do about it and how we can all break our addictive mentality. So don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the Human Narrative Podcast, where we share stories that resonate amongst us all.
Welcome back to another episode of the Human Narrative, my friends. I am your host, Sober Webb. And as I already alluded to in the intro, today's narrative is about pain. No, now it's not physical pain we're going to talk about per se, although actually the pain that I'm going to talk about can manifest as physical pain, but that's a conversation for another time. No, this is a collective emotional, mental, and spiritual pain that comes from the past. And to broach the topic, I'm going to share with you an excerpt from a book that I'm working on where I dedicate a whole chapter to this concept. Now, I've tweaked it a bit for the podcast, but I think that the message will hit home no matter what. So listen up, because here we go. How pain manifests is specific to our individual journey. How it manifests in our life is specific to our individual trauma or life experiences. It's even passed on to us by the generations that have come before. Regardless of our separate stories and journeys, however, we all share this pain, no matter where we come from, who we are, when we were born, what color our skin is, whether we are rich or poor, if we are an addict, if we've never struggled with addiction, if we have it all quote unquote figured out, if we have no idea what we're doing with our life, so on and so forth. We are all human. And we all struggle with the same exact feelings and emotions that make up what I like to refer to as the pain pentagonal. And so I can paint an image of the pain pentagonal for you as a reference point, I want you to imagine a pentagon or a star. It has 5 points. The top point is fear, and then moving clockwise, you have guilt, grief, resentment, and shame. These 5 things, in my opinion, comprise the pain pentagonal. And I'm sure that you recognize them all because none of us are free from any of them. Addicts and quote unquote non-addicts alike at one time or another have felt the effects of these 5 emotions. Sadly, more often than not, many humans live their entire lives crippled by the power of these 5 because the pain pentagonal becomes the only identity many of them ever know. And it was in the halls of AA that I began to understand this, even in the thick fog of my early recovery. If you don't know my story at all, I battled alcoholism from the age of 24 to 37. I now call myself a recovered alcoholic, if I even label myself anything at all. But I got sober on October 1st, 2017. And even though this episode, this podcast in general, are not about sobriety and recovery specifically, the conversation around AA does have to do a lot with where I learned about pain, because the beauty of AA is that one can simply sit and listen. You don't need to talk to learn much from those willing to share their stories. And in every story I heard, as well as my own, I eventually uncovered this pain pentagonal was always present. And maybe you've been to AA. Maybe you've not been to AA. Maybe you'll never go. Maybe you don't even need to. Regardless, think about and listen for the pain pentagonal as you walk through life and interact with others, and more importantly, even as you interact with yourself and your feelings. If you listen closely to the stories and words describing stress or anxiety, you'll hear the fear within them. Everyone talks of loss in one way or another, but grief is denied because so many think grief only has to do with death. So listen for all of that. We all know guilt because none of us are free from making bad choices. And deep down in all of us, there is compassion, empathy, and the ability to know right from wrong. Listen for that as you go through life. And then shame is embarrassment in a darker form, and no human is free of it because we all struggle with a fear of what others think of us. And maybe look for that within yourself. And then finally, resentment is just a bigger word for envy because someone has something that we don't have. And in that moment, it makes us feel sorry for ourselves and thus hate ourselves by hating someone else. And it's okay if all of this resonates with you. It's okay if all of these things are prevalent in your life because we're human and we would not be human if we did not experience them. However, in quote unquote addiction or how it manifests, they become fuel for the fire. They become our identity and reality because reality, more precisely, pain from the past, is what we are most afraid of. I love Eckhart Tolle and I love his book, The Power of Now. If you haven't read it, you absolutely should. But at one point, he quotes, "Every addiction arises from an unconscious refusal to face and move through your own pain. Every addiction starts with pain and ends with pain. Whatever the substance you are addicted to, alcohol, food, legal or illegal drugs, or a person, you are using something or somebody to cover up your pain." End quote. So, all of these feelings keep us from being present in the moment, which is exactly the purpose of an addiction. To break it down further, based on the feelings that comprise pain, grief allows us to stay in the past and mourn what we have lost. Guilt lets us dwell on something we did wrong so we can justify our suffering. Shame is the regurgitation of unworthiness from a time and place where we decided, or maybe we were told, that we were not lovable. And then resentment, aka envy, allows us to feel sorry for ourselves and what we have not been given in our life. They are all forms of living in the past, and addiction represents a reality we are not able to face yet. But let's not forget fear, which, if you notice, is at the top of the pain pentagonal, and it's there for a reason. I got to know my fears very well during my time in AA. While I was there, I had a sponsor and I worked through step 4, which is to do a fearless moral inventory. Step 4 is very intense, and without proper guidance from a very good sponsor, someone who has done quote unquote the work and has had a spiritual awakening, it can be really, really overwhelming. And a big portion of it is to list all of your resentments and fears and, in turn, associate those with a part of yourself that has been hurt or affected by said resentments and fears. And just to give you some context, what the self is, AA describes it as 7 parts. 1, self-esteem, how I think about myself. 2, pride, how I think others view me. 3, pocketbook, basic desire for material stuff. 4, personal relations, our relations with others. 5, ambition, our goals, plans, and designs for the future. 6, emotional security, general sense of personal well-being. And then finally, 7, sex relations, basic drive for sexual intimacy. Now, I am providing these for reference only as this book that I'm working on and this podcast is not about or for AA. I always offer this caveat that I am neither for nor against AA. It was part of my journey, but eventually it could not be part of my journey. There are things that I agree with and things that I disagree with. However, this sense of self and the work in step 4 is something that is absolutely vital to understanding and working through the whys of addiction in order to step into the full power of sobriety. So, to keep things simple, however, for the rest of the book and this reading, let's just think of the 7 parts of the self as our ego. And that's a capital E because it is an entity and it loves addiction. Eckhart Tolle states this pretty plainly in his book, A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose. He says, addiction to drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, or a compulsive need for power, status, recognition, or approval are all ego substitutes for the true joy, vitality, and aliveness of being. End quote. So this applies to anything that could become an addiction and used to avoid reality. Religion, work, money, dating, relationships, parenting, social media, food, etc. I mean, the list could go on and on and on. But to bring fear back into the conversation, since that is the current topic, it is one of the ego's primary tools keeping us from finding peace and ultimately who we are meant to be, or as Eckhart Tolle phrases it, becoming our true being. Fear uses all of these things Addictions that probably didn't start off as addictions in order to blind, hinder, and barricade us from evolving and becoming more. And it does it in such destructive ways. There's a phrase that says, money is the root of all evil, but honestly, really, fear is the root of all evil. I mean, think about all the pain and suffering it has caused, the broken relationships it's spearheaded, the dysfunctional relationships it's kept glued together, the quote unquote toxic personalities walking and pulling others into their drama, the wars, the deaths, the financial ruin, the broken homes, and the damaged dreams. Think about the hate that fear has fed, the shame it has nurtured, and the guilt it has spawned. Now, in lieu of that last sentence, what I just said, maybe guilt and shame shouldn't even be part of the pain pentagonal. And I guess I'm about to digress a bit on my pain pentagonal theory, but just go with me on this. Let's get a bit more micro on pain and consider the pain pentagonal as a macro view on it all. In terms of shame and guilt, we all experience them, but I guess in a way, they're actually offspring of fear. Shame is a mix of the fear of people's opinions and not being good enough. Guilt is a cocktail of fearing we've done something wrong, we've made a bad choice, or maybe we've hurt someone or something, combined with a fear of being a disappointment. Of course, there are many more fears that can be wrapped up into both, so I guess I did just debunk my own theory, but it's a good starting point and a good conversation in general. So, fine tuning it all now, however, let's kick shame and guilt out of the Pentagon, because I guess they're just not crooked enough politicians to be part of the pain hierarchy anymore, which leaves us with fear, grief, and resentment. Resentment being AKA envy. And since addiction is a means of avoiding reality because there is pain in the present that represents something unhealed in the past that we don't want to face, thus we use an addiction to help numb us out. And fear is the root of all evil. That leaves us with a triangle that perfectly represents pain, addiction, and the avoidance of our present moment at any point in time. Fear is the future, grief is the past, and resentment as envy and a lack of gratitude is the present moment. So we drink, we smoke, we shoot up, we have sex with people, we work, we gamble, shop, date, scroll, troll, comment, we like, subscribe, eat, work out, etc. And we binge on our pain over and over and over, and in a myriad more ways, because it all seems easier than facing and healing our pain. And it's okay. If you do this, we all do it. I do it still, even as I'm sober, it's okay. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with us because we do this. But that's why everyone needs sobriety, because everyone is an addict. Everyone has pain, fear, grief, guilt, shame, toxicity, trauma, etc. from the past that needs to be healed. Everyone has an unhealthy relationship with something that they use in unhealthy ways. The term quote unquote addiction does not just apply to those who abuse alcohol and drugs. And more than likely, whoever's listening to this podcast or eventually reading the book, they probably struggle with alcohol or addiction in a stigmatized way. I mean, if you know, you know. For those that don't know what I mean, the stigma is the quote unquote, oh no, they have a problem kind of way. You know, they can't stop once they start. They feel an immense amount of shame about losing control. They have been shunned into submission. They have been banned from worlds they once were part of. They have lost all identity of themselves, and they have been labeled or have labeled themselves an alcoholic or an addict. The difference, however, between them and those that will never recover, because sadly there are those who will never overcome their addiction and they'll be stuck in the partial life of the one that they were meant to live, is that they have reached a point where they no longer want to be constrained by any terms or mentalities and subsequent stigmas associated with the labels applied to the recovery world. So, the book that I'm writing and this podcast, or at least this episode, is definitely for them. On the flip side of the recovery spectrum, even though I am a recovered alcoholic and I focus a lot of my content and writing on recovery from alcoholism and addiction, I really actually hope that there are a lot of quote unquote normal people that are reading this book or listening to this podcast. You know, the ones that can stop drinking once they start, the ones who have never touched a drug, the ones that know how to control their impulses, the ones who, on the outside, look like they have it all figured out, but maybe deep down are just as unhappy as any addict or alcoholic. Is it possible that many people in this world are restless, irritable, and discontent, even though they have no idea why? Maybe money doesn't find them the happiness that they thought they would find after chasing it for so long. Maybe marriage and family don't fill the void they once thought was a child of their loneliness. No amount of makeup, fashionable clothing, or tricked out cars can hide the wounds created by a lack of self love. No abundance of prayer, baptisms, confessing of sins, or paying in penance will erase the fact that they have no identity outside of what they've been told that they are. If any of that resonates with you and you think that I'm judging you or judging other people, please know that I was once all of the above. There's no judgment at all because I was an alcoholic born from guilt and shame. I was a sheep blindly following agreements made for me by others, which eventually bred a self hate and loathing that fed the guilt and shame that bore my alcoholism. I chased relationship after relationship, unconsciously hoping that I could fix myself by fixing others. And I was married, and I was still empty. I became a father, and I was still empty, even while swimming deeper into the bottle. And my addictions honestly really had nothing to do with alcohol for a very long time because as a child growing up, I was addicted to religion, and I was made to believe that my identity was based on a man shedding his blood on a cross so I could have eternal life. And then I was addicted to this idea that I was a quote unquote sinner, which bred this fear of always being a failure that dictated much of my life. And eventually I became addicted to making everyone else happy while I slowly erased myself over the course of my life up until I was 37 years old. I was also addicted to the attention women gave me when I eventually realized I was not an ugly duckling and I had charm and talent that I could use to get what I want. And then I was addicted to not asking for help. I was also addicted to self-deprecation and body dysmorphia. And then I was addicted to self-induced misery, even though I had no idea that is what was happening. So, all of these addictions spawned fear, shame, guilt, grief, trauma, and pain that eventually manifested in a physical addiction to nicotine and an emotional and mental addiction to alcohol. I smoked because I was angry, and I drank because I was sad, ashamed, and I was in so much pain. And while that all sounds very dark and sinister, the answer for me was sobriety. And it was first just quitting alcohol, getting sober, staying sober, and understanding that I didn't need alcohol to cope with life anymore. But sobriety is so much more than just not using a substance or liquid to cope with life. Sobriety is figuring out how to not erase the pain of the past in order to live a better life. It's how you heal it and come to terms with it and forgive yourself of all of that pain so that on a daily basis, you can live your life to the best of your ability. And that's why I believe sobriety is for everyone. And that's why I believe that everyone's an addict, because we all struggle, but we can all use a way to just live a better life and be free of all of those feelings, the fear, the guilt, the shame, the grief, the resentment that has probably bogged us down for so long. So, listener, if this resonates with you, thank you so much for listening. I hope that something really hit home with you today. I get pain. I understand it. I've been there. I've been through the ringer with it all. I still deal with it on a daily basis. Just because I'm sober doesn't mean I'm out just living a grief-free, fear-free life. No, I still deal with it on a daily basis, but I've learned how to deal with it in a healthy way. And also just know that I get to choose to let it go so that I can face reality, whether it's good or bad. And you can do it too. Everyone can do it. We can all heal the pain of the past, the pain in this moment, so that we do not have to run from reality anymore. There is hope. There are so many possibilities in sobriety, regardless if you struggle with substance or alcohol or whatever it is. We all can embrace an aspect of sobriety that will give us a better life. And I promise you, listener, it is so worth all of the work. And there you have it, my friends. That's the narrative for the day, and I'm sticking with it. Much love and much life until the next episode. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. And I really, really appreciate you supporting my podcast, The Human Narrative. I can't wait to bring you more valuable episodes. So talk to you next week. Bye.